Ever heard that saying? Something about how a butterfly flapping its wings can cause a hurricane halfway across the world?
Oh yeah, the butterfly effect.
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today, how these tiny moments, almost invisible decisions, might have completely reshaped the Middle East. We're talking about the Six-Day War.
Fascinating period, really, because, it's tempting to look back and think, oh, this was bound to happen, but the Six-Day War, it was anything but a sure thing.
Right. It wasn't just some spontaneous explosion, was it?
Not at all. Decades, we're talking decades of simmering tensions, broken treaties, missed opportunities for peace. All of that's the backdrop to this whole conflict.
So before we even get to 67, paint us a picture. What was the relationship like between Israel and its neighbors?
Imagine a powder keg. Okay, That's what the Middle East was in the years leading up to the war.
Volatile.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And a lot of this tension, it stems all the way back to the 1948 Arab-Israeli War.
Yeah.
Right when Israel declared independence.
Huge moment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But that victory, it came at a cost. Deep scars, resentment in the Arab world, it lingered.
We're like that first crack in a dam, right?
Yeah.
The pressure just keeps building.
Perfect analogy. Now, fast forward to 1967, we meet Gamal Abdel Nasser, Egypt's leader, charismatic guy. He makes what seems like a small move, but whoa, it lights the fuse.
This is where the butterfly effect really takes off.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
May 1967, Nasser closes the Straits of Tiran to Israeli ships.
Okay, and for those of us who aren't experts in Middle Eastern geography, why was that such a big deal?
Right, so picture this. The Straits of Tiran is this narrow passageway, right? Controls access to Israel's southern port, Eilat. Vital for trade.
Their lifeline.
Exactly. So close that off, and suddenly Israel's in a tight spot, economically vulnerable, dependent on a nation that's, shall we say, not their biggest fan.
More than an inconvenience, it was a statement.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. Nasser himself, some historians argue, he didn't even fully grasp what he'd set in motion.
You're kidding. He didn't intend for all-out war.
It's debated, of course, but some say he saw it as a gamble, a bluff even, to try and call Israel's bluff. Didn't necessarily want full-blown conflict, but by pushing, he may have accidentally nudged the whole region closer to the brink.
So you've got this incredibly tense standoff, and then Nasser, he raises the stakes even higher, doesn't he?
Oh, absolutely. Closing the straits was just the beginning. He starts moving troops into the Sinai Peninsula, right on Israel's doorstep. And to really turn up the heat, he kicks out the UN peacekeepers, the guys who were supposed to be there keeping a lid on things.
Wow. Talk about upping the ante. At that point, did people feel like war was a certainty? Or were there still doors open for peace that just, I don't know, maybe I'd overlooked?
That's the question, isn't it? The what if that keeps historians up at night. Could diplomacy have found a way through? We can't say for sure. But what we do know is that both sides, they were locked in, convinced the other was about to strike.
Like a pair of gunslingers in an old Western.
Exactly. You know that feeling when you can just tell a fight's about to break out? It's electric, right? That's the kind of energy we're talking about, but on a massive international scale. Every move amplified 1,000-fold. And back in Israel itself, well, their government was having some pretty intense debates about what to do.
I bet. What was the feeling like there?
Prime Minister Levi Eshkol, he was urging caution, trying to keep things cool-headed. But then you have his defense minister, Moshe Dayan, a whole different story.
This is where personalities really come into play, right? Not just policies on paper, but the people calling the shots.
100%.
Yeah.
Dayan was, well, he was a legend. Military hero, firm believer that Israel couldn't afford to just sit and wait for Nasser to make the next move.
So he was the one pushing for action.
He saw a preemptive strike as the only way to guarantee Israel's safety. Now, whether you agree with that assessment or not, that's a whole other discussion. But Dayan's personality, his influence, it carried a lot of weight. That decision to go on the offensive, seize the moment. Well, it was another one of those butterfly moments, the kind that echo through history.
Okay, so let's recap. We've got Nasser closing the straits, mobilizing his troops, maybe not totally aware of the dominoes he's toppling. And in Israel, you've got this internal struggle, caution versus aggression, and Dayan's voice, it ends up winning out. And that's when the other shoe drops. June 5th, 1967, Operation Focus. For our listeners who've been following this chain of events, this cascade of decisions, what happens next?
It's a whirlwind. Imagine yourself back then. No 24-hour news cycle, word of mouth, crackling radios. Israel launches these surprise attacks on Egyptian airfield.
Bold move.
Incredibly. They cripple Egypt's air force before they can even scramble to respond. This wasn't just a border clash. This was a full-on, we strike first kind of operation.
Huge gamble, wasn't it?
It was. But it paid off, in the short term at least. And then the whole thing snowballs. Jordan and Syria, they get pulled in alongside Egypt.
Hold on, more countries. How did that happen?
Well, that's another one of those butterfly effects we've been talking about.
Okay, so walk us through it. Jordan, they weren't part of the initial conflict, were they?
King Hussein, he's in a tight spot. He's getting pressure, right? His Arab allies, they want a united front against Israel. And on top of that, he's getting bad intel. Rumors flying around that Egypt's actually winning the war.
Wow.
Turns out it's completely false. But in the heat of the moment, it pushes Hussein over the edge, he commits his forces, and, well, classic case of misinformation having huge consequences.
It's almost Shakespearean, isn't it? The weight of those decisions. Had he resisted, if he'd had accurate information, who knows what might have happened?
Exactly. Some historians say if Hussein had stayed out, Jordan might have held on to the West Bank, East Jerusalem. But the fog of war, the pressure from all sides, it pushed him down a different path.
And so this conflict that began with, a dispute over a strait, it erupts into this massive regional war, redrawing the map of the Middle East in just 6 days.
6 days that changed everything. We've talked about the choices, the missteps, the unintended outcomes, but it's essential to remember the human cost of this conflict. The countless lives lost and forever altered.
It's easy to get lost in the geopolitical maneuvering, but at the heart of it, these are people, families caught in the crossfire.
Exactly. And it's something that we have to keep in mind as we unpack the legacy of this war, the long shadow of the 6-Day War. Because this wasn't just about land, it was about identity, religion, the very soul of a region.
So the war ends, things settle. What's the situation on the ground?
Israel emerges victorious, and they find themselves in control of new territory. The West Bank, East Jerusalem, the Golan Heights.
Significant gains.
Huge. And crucial to remember, this wasn't just about strategic value, about drawing lines on a map. These were lands of deep religious and historical meaning, and Israel's control over them would become a flashpoint for decades to come.
Jerusalem especially, right, becomes this incredibly potent symbol.
Absolutely. For Jews, it's the eternal capital, the site of their holiest temples.
Yeah.
For Muslims, it's home to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest site in Islam. Israel claiming control over the whole city, it just ignited religious tensions that had been simmering for centuries. And to be clear, these tensions, they didn't just vanish after 1967. They're still shaping the Israeli-Palestinian conflict today.
The victors writing the maps, as they say, but those victories, they often come with new challenges, don't they?
They do. And one of the unintended consequences of the 6-Day War, it was the rise of the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO. The Palestinian people, their land now occupied, their future uncertain, they found a voice, a vehicle to fight for their self-determination. It's a tragic irony, isn't it? The war that Israel fought to secure its existence ultimately led to a movement that would challenge that very legitimacy.
The law of unintended consequences. It's a powerful reminder that history is far more complex than simple cause and effect.
It truly is.
As we zoom out and look at this, it's clear the 6-Day War wasn't just this isolated event. It was a hinge point, this collision of what-ifs that set in motion forces still shaping the Middle East today.
And that's probably the most crucial takeaway from all of this. We study history and we often fixate on the big events, the battles, the treaties. But the 6-Day War shows us that sometimes it's the smallest choices, the seemingly insignificant moments that can have the most dramatic impact on the course of history.
A butterfly flaps its wings.
Exactly. And it reminds us that history isn't set in stone. It's fluid, constantly being reshaped by every choice we make, every action we take, even our inactions. It's a lot to think about.
It really is. It makes you wonder about the butterfly effects rippling out from our own lives, doesn't it? What decisions are we making today that might seem small but could echo into the future? It's a question worth pondering.
I think so.
Well, on that note, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. And a huge thank you to our expert for lending their incredible insights to this complex and utterly fascinating topic.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those what-ifs coming.